this case study, we will review an importer who has been affected by special tariffs, not only by having to pay additional tariffs owed to CBP, but also by continually monitoring its import bond to ensure it remains in compliance with CBP requirements. Before we delve into this spreadsheet, let's discuss a few general assumptions. First of all, in this example, this is a brand new importer who has never imported before. They obtained a $50,000 continuous bond that took effect on January 1st. They had 10 entries per month valued at $100,000 each. Every month, they had a total import value of $1 million. Also, they had a 3.5% duty rate. $1 million times 3.5% equals $35,000 in ordinary duties every single month. Just for the purpose of this case study, let's say there are no taxes. There's also no special tariffs that apply during this first year of the bond. Based on this information, a $50,000 bond amount is sufficient all year long based on the rolling 12 months of duties plus taxes plus fees. Let's talk about that a little bit. A continuous import bond is calculated by taking 10% of the total duties, taxes, and fees paid on a rolling 12-month basis. Customs looks at bond sufficiency every single month for all active continuous import bonds. In June, it reviews the previous June to the current May year, so a 12-month period. In July, it looks from July of the previous year to June of the current year to get the 12 months worth of duties, taxes, and fees. That's a rolling 12 months. In January, this importer had $35,000 in ordinary duties. It also paid $3,464 in merchandise processing fees and no tariffs. We get to $38,464 in total duties, taxes, and fees. Did the same thing in February, same ordinary duties, same MPF, no special tariffs to get to the same amount of duties, taxes, and fees for that month, which means that its rolling 12-month period of duties, taxes, and fees is $76,928. That's adding up the total duties, taxes, and fees for January and February. You look at that in March, third rolling 12 months of duties, taxes, and fees is $115,392. Because we added up January, February, and March as total duty, taxes, and fees, by the end of December, this importer had a total of $461,568 in a rolling 12 months duties, taxes, and fees, which is a total of January through December. Now, year 2, the bond renews on January 1st. As a result of stacking liability, the aggregate bond liability at January 1st is now $100,000. What does this mean? Year 1, this importer had a $50,000 import bond. It then renewed in the following year for another $50,000. The total aggregate bond liability that is reviewed is now $100,000 for the previous year plus the renewed year. Back to the spreadsheet. Let's say in this second year, where the bond renewed, these same importations valued at $100,000 each, 3.5% in ordinary duty rate, but now a 25% special tariff kicks in on January 1st, thereby increasing the rolling 12 months of duties plus taxes plus fees. Now, we add in the $35,000 of ordinary duties plus the $3,464 in MPF plus $250,000 in this special tariff, which is 25% of the import values for that month. Very quickly, the duties, taxes, and fees start stacking up for the rolling 12-month period. We'll take a closer look at January. Again, this is the second year where the bond renewed. By the end of January, this importer has a rolling 12 months of duties, taxes, and fees totaling $711,568. That's where we've added up February 1st of the previous year all the way to the end of January to get the total amount. In January, they had to include the additional special tariff, which increased their total duties, taxes, and fees. At this point, Customs issues a demand for a larger bond, no less than $80,000. Since the continuous import bond, again, is calculated at 10% of the total duties, taxes, and fees paid for the previous 12 months. A $50,000 bond no longer can be submitted to Customs for this importer based on their rolling 12 months of duties and taxes and fees. Also, once the bond is reissued for $80,000, the aggregate bond liability has now increased. We had year one of the bond amount, plus year two when the bond renewed, plus this new increased bond, which is $180,000. Why does that matter? The underwriters for this surety company that are writing this bond are looking at the financial stability of this importer to make sure that should a claim arise against any of these bonds that were filed, that the importer is capable of resolving or paying for that claim. Now, that was January. Let's take a look at the end of February. They've now paid a total of $961,568 in duties, taxes, and fees. We took the total of March 1st from the previous year all the way up to the end of February to get that amount. Now, Customs issues a demand for a bond no less than $100,000. On top of that, if the importer were to increase its bond to only $100,000, the aggregate liability is now $280,000. You'll see we continue adding the total amounts of each bond that this importer has had. By the end of March, they are now up to $1.2 million in duties, taxes, and fees. Customs will issue a demand this time for a bond no less than $200,000 based on the duties, taxes, and fees for April 1st of the previous year to the end of March for the current year. The bond amount is increased to $200,000 rather than the $120,000 because once the total duties, taxes, and fees exceed $1 million, CBP requires bond amounts in multiples of $100,000 rather than $10,000. So the new bond is issued for $200,000 and their aggregate bond liability is increased by that amount, now totaling $480,000 in aggregate bond liability. We move ahead a few months, and by the end of July, they are now at $2.2 million in duties, taxes, and fees for that rolling 12-month basis, which is from August 1st of the previous year to the end of July for the current year. Now, they need a $300,000 bond as per Customs. If they file that $300,000 bond, their aggregate bond liability is now $780,000 based on the total bond amounts. We move to the end of November. They're now up to over $3.2 million in duties, taxes, and fees. Customs issues a letter requiring a $400,000 bond. If that importer files the $400,000 bond at this time, their aggregate liability is now over $1.1 million. Why does aggregate bond liability matter? First of all, a continuous bond is in reality a self-renewing term bond. As we state here, we've copied the text from U.S. Customs on the bond language itself. This bond remains in force for 1 year, beginning with the effective date and for each succeeding annual period or until terminated. This bond constitutes a separate bond for each period in the amounts listed below for liabilities that accrue in each period. As I was stating earlier, The bond is filed at $50,000 in this specific example. When it renews, that bond constitutes a separate bond amount for an additional $50,000. We have the translation here. A $50,000 bond in effect for between 1 and 2 years is a total of $100,000 in liability. If a bond is in effect between 2 and 3 years, it's $150,000 in liability, and so on. This becomes the component of aggregate liability. In this case study, had this importer planned ahead and filed a $400,000 bond in the beginning of the year, it would have reduced its aggregate bond liability to $500,000 instead of $1,180,000. The surety considers an importer's aggregate bond liability as part of its underwriting process. The larger the amount, the greater the probability that additional underwriting requirements will be needed. Also, the importer and surety are exposed to potential liquidated damages capped by the bond amount. The importer in our case study could have reduced its exposure to $500,000 instead of incurring the $1,180,000 in exposure. We strongly recommend that importers work with their customs brokers and their sureties to determine the correct bond amount for the importer. It's important to accurately project the upcoming 12 months to see how much the importer intends to import in value and the duties, taxes, and fees. This way, you can issue the correct bond amount the first time in order to reduce both the importer's and the surety's liability.